Today we'll be discussing improvement points in breaststroke in more general terms by looking at what elite swimmers do differently in terms of their technique. We've got two new words today, which are neuromuscular and biomechanical. These are two big words, but you can think of them in simple ways. Neuromuscular basically means the way that your brain and your nerves control your muscles. So you have the term neuro, that's the first part, which relates to the brain and the nerves. And then you have the term muscular, which relates to the muscles. Together, it means how your brains and nerves control your muscles. Second, we have biomechanical, and this is how your body moves your joints to do work. First up, we have the word bio at the start, and that means that relates to living things. And then you have the term mechanical, which means the process of movement and locomotion. And together it means how your body moves. These two ideas are very important to look into when improving breaststroke swimming because they hold the answer to what actually makes these elite swimmers as good as they are. And this applies virtually to all sports in terms of analyzing athletes at the elite level, their neuromuscular activity and their biomechanical processes. And at least considering how their technique is different to younger or less experienced swimmers. And looking at what elite swimmers do is important because they're the pinnacle of the sport that you train for. And so clearly what works for them is likely, in most cases, to work for you as well. In some cases, this isn't the right way to think, but the concepts we'll be going through today will be pretty general in terms of improvement points, and they should apply to breaststroke swimming for all ages and abilities as well. The normal way to teach technique is through showing what you mean, by showing them exactly what you're doing and how they should replicate that in the water. This approach is what I think to be the top-down approach. This is because the technique is being taught as it should look. I see the coaching levels of explaining technique as this. At the top, at the highest level, you have how the technique should look to the observer, the coach, or someone standing outside of the water. This is something like the arms recovering quickly into the glide after breathing. So that's just me showing what it should look like. Then comes how the technique should be thought of in the mind of the swimmer, him or herself. And so this is something like when I say fitting into the witch's cone. So the swimmer would imagine a witch's cone and going really from a wide recovery to a narrow glide. And so this is more of a visualization method. And then I believe at the root of understanding technique is what muscles are used in the technique itself. And so this can be applied to swimmers that are a little bit older and understand the human body and its muscles a little bit better. And I believe it's really important for this root level type of technique explanation, because if you can explain at the root level of what's happening, the swimmers can visualize more specifically what muscles they should be using, right? And for example, this would look like something like activating the tricep muscles when you're in your glide. Because when you activate your tricep muscles, your elbow goes straight and then you're in a very tight position in your streamline. I believe that the research that we'll go through today will be more of a bottom-up approach, where if we understand the root cause of good technique, which is from the muscular level, it'll be easier to learn what specifically in the technique of elite swimmers makes them as good as they are. And remember that there are other reasons to what makes people great at swimming or any sport, including effort, your mindset, the power that you make in the water with the muscles, and the experience that you have over the years of competing and training for that sport. First, we'll go through neuromuscular analysis of swimmers' breaststroke technique through a scientific review article about breaststroke swimming. A review article is a research article which brings together a large range of other scientific articles to provide an overview of all the research that has been done in that area of science. Again, remember that neuromuscular means how the brain and the nerves control the muscles in your body. By understanding what are the muscles that elite swimmers use in their technique and at what time specifically, you'll be able to understand some of the reasons why they can swim so fast. The first study is from a research team led by Emily Nicol with her colleagues. It gathers research across the scientific community about stroke kinematics, temporal patterns, neuromuscular activity, pacing, and kinetics in elite breaststroke swimming. What we want to understand from this paper specifically is the neuromuscular activity. Alright, now we're going to go through exactly what muscles are used in what phase of breaststroke and why they're used to improve technique. And again, this is amongst elite breaststroke swimmers. First up, you have the muscle called tibialis anterior. And what that is the outer shin on your leg. And so what they found with that muscle is that elite swimmers tended to activate that muscle later when they were recovering their legs, preparing for a kick. And so the reason why they would do that is because when you activate your tibialis anterior, which is your outer shin, your feet will come apart like this. And so if they activated it later in their recovery, their feet wouldn't come out and cause drag, which would slow them down. And again, if you look at the graph which I put in the previous video, you'll see that after the glide phase, before you're starting the kick, that is where your speed drops the most dramatically. And so that is why tibialis anterior activation is done later amongst elite breaststroke swimmers. Another kind of motion which is important inside this study is plantar flexion. So what's plantar flexion? That's basically the straightening of your feet, kind of like how a ballerina would point her toes when she's doing the spinnies, right? And so plantar flexion is very important and is seen in elite swimmers during the glide phase. So pointing the feet and activating the calf muscle, which is called the gastrocnemius, that would ensure that during the glide, the water is flowing over your body and towards your feet very smoothly. Third, we have increased triceps brachii activation, which is just basically your triceps here. And they found that the triceps were activated quite a lot during the glide phase, right? And so just before getting into the glide, the elite swimmers would snap in and become very tight, activating their triceps. And the reason behind that is because when you activate your triceps, as I mentioned before, you become very streamlined because your elbow becomes straight towards your arm. And so again, activation of triceps during the glide phase, just after the kick. Some other observations amongst elite breaststroke swimmers was the activation of the biceps and the pectoral muscle earlier on during the pull phase, during your arms, when you're doing your arms. So what that meant was instead of just using the triceps to pull the water, you want to focus in on using biceps and pectoral muscles to start the initial pull and engage it all the way through. And just an overall philosophy to breaststroke, which I kind of picked up when I was looking at the neuromuscular activation, was making sure that when you're not producing propulsion, right? So with whatever body part you're not producing propulsion, it is as streamlined as possible, right? So if the legs aren't immediately kicking, that means they are as streamlined as possible the entire way until they do the kick. And for the arms, if they're not producing propulsion, as in pulling the water towards the body, then they're snapped straight and making sure you're not wider than you need to be when you don't need to be. This second part of the video will go through a biomechanical analysis of breaststroke kick from Alexander Teicher and colleagues through an analysis of breaststroke kick. The conclusions that came from this paper were twofold. The first was that the kick length and the knee joint range of motion has a positive impact on breaststroke swimming technique speed. The primary understanding of this is that knee mobility, so what's the range of motion that your knees can be flexed to, is what is impactful towards a good breaststroke technique. And so this can be explained by narrow kicks and the advantages that come from that, which we discussed in the previous video. Another conclusion that this paper found was the hip displacement of the breaststroke phase was not related to foot slip. So this again agrees with the discussion in the previous video, where the more vertical range of kick that is used, so the more the hips and the legs undulate in the water, the more powerful and fast the kick will be. In other words, more vertical range equals a better feel for the water. Again, you can see in the clip that I'll try and put to my left that the more experienced breaststroke swimmers have a really wide knee mobility, but they keep their hips and their knees relatively close together when they're swimming. So to summarize this video, we've gone through the neuromuscular activity within elite breaststroke swimmers, and that allowed us to understand how they swim so fast. And from understanding this neuromuscular activity, we can also practice that in our own training sessions and improve our technique through that way. Another analysis that we did was biomechanical, which was a little bit shorter, but it still agreed with the previous concepts that we went through in the video before this one, which talked about breaststroke. So that was about hip displacement and knee mobility, which overall meant that a narrow kick and an undulating breaststroke kick is more advantageous than a wide and horizontally based kick. All right, so we've covered everything that we've set out to cover in the video today, and I hope that you've learnt something new and something to apply when you swim breaststroke next time. Just remember that you can have all the learnings in the world, have all the best technique in the world, but if you're not putting in effort, which is the main thing that counts, you won't improve as fast as you can. So remember, at the origin, at the root of everything, make sure you're putting in the effort, and everything else will fall into place.